Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. So today we're going to talk about two insurance companies that are going after each other and Amber Heard, and I'll have more on that in just a moment. So Travelers was the first insurance company in this case to race to the courthouse. It got there first and it filed an action against New York Marine. It's important to note they didn't sue Amber Heard. They just sued New York Marine. And this is how they opened their lawsuit. Defendant New York Marine and General Insurance Companies, New York Marine, failure to meet its obligation to provide its travelers mutual insured with independent counsel and other counsel necessary to defend their insured is a breach of its insurance policy and its obligations under California law and has unfairly forced travelers to pay New York Marine's proper share of defense costs. Travelers has been damaged by this conduct and it is entitled to judgment in the form of a declaration that New York Marine was obligated to provide the mutual insured with independent counsel. Well, that's really about all you need to know about the Travelers case. It is seeking recompense from New York Marine for Travelers having footed the majority of the bill with regard to the defense costs in the Heard versus Depp saga. But the lawsuit actually goes a little bit further than that. One of the things that's interesting to me is that they note in their pleadings that they accepted the tender of the case. In other words, when Amber Heard went to them and said, "Here, defend me," they accepted that under what's called a reservation of rights. A reservation of rights is essentially an insurance company saying, okay, our duty to defend you is greater than our duty to indemnify you. We don't think that we're going to be liable if you are held accountable, and so we'll defend under this reservation of rights, which basically says, hey, sweetie, you're on your own if you get hit with a big judgment. So there's really no difference between them and New York Marine in that context. But they go on and they say this: Travelers and New York Marine each owed the mutual insured a defense with independent counsel of the mutual insured's choice. Travelers is providing that, and New York Marine has not. Worse, New York Marine has indicated that after trial, it will likely attempt to deny coverage for any award against the mutual insured based on its reservation of rights. Now wait a minute. You reserved rights. What gives you the right to reserve rights but not New York Marine? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense here. So the next thing they ask for is a declaration of rights. Accordingly, Travelers seeks a declaration that New York Marine had and has an obligation to defend the mutual insured in the underlying action with independent counsel. And then they say, a few paragraphs later, this: Travelers has spent substantial sums so far toward the mutual insured's defense in the underlying action with independent counsel of the mutual insured's choosing, as well as other counsel, experts, and vendors necessary to defend the lawsuit. The case continues and the amount incurred by Travelers continues to grow. So at the time they filed this, the case had really come to fruition, and the only thing that was really left at that point was the appeal. But I can understand why they say it's going to continue to keep going, because they did file an appeal on Amber Heard's behalf. So that is the gist of Travelers' lawsuit. There are a few additional counts and a few additional allegations, none of which are particularly novel, and basically they're relying on California law to ask for a declaration of rights so that they can make New York Marine pay what they consider to be its fair share. But what about New York Marine? New York Marine sued Travelers, and they also sued Amber Heard. First they sued Travelers, and then a few days later, they sued Amber Heard. And this is what their complaint says. In this action, New York Marine seeks a judicial determination of the respective rights of the parties under an insurance policy issued to Under the Black Sky, Inc., which included Amber Heard as a named insured with respect to Heard's defense and indemnity in the underlying lawsuit. The lawsuit then goes on to say, the policy defines personal injury to mean injury other than bodily injury arising out of one or more enumerated offenses included in the policy, including other forms of defamation, that violates a person's right to privacy. The lawsuit basically says, hey, we sold her this policy and it covers defamation. But of course, that's not the end of it. On October 1, New York Marine accepted Heard's defense of the action subject to a reservation of rights. Specifically, New York Marine advised Heard that New York Marine would provide a legal defense, but to the extent California law does not permit an insurer to indemnify the insured, no indemnity can be provided. So it's interesting here that they are pushing the blame off on the state of California. They go on to say, New York Marine is informed and believes, and on such information and belief alleges, that Heard or her agents instructed other firms defending Heard in the underlying action to not include Cameron McAvoy, which was the firm that New York Marine had hired, in Heard's ongoing defense. As a result, on or around November 2nd, Cameron McAvoy withdrew from the defense of Heard in the underlying action. That's important because one of the other complaints from travelers is we didn't provide, insured a defense of her choosing, when it's apparent that, at least according to New York Marine, they believe they did. The complaint then goes through the causes of action for defamation and some of the allegations and the information that the jury was required to find in order to return a verdict in favor of Johnny Depp. And it goes through all of those things and then at the end says this. After answering all of those questions yes, the jury also answered yes to the question, do you find that Mr. Depp has proven by clear and convincing evidence that Ms. Heard acted with actual malice? So actual malice is important here because it means it was a willful act. And that's important for this reason. California Insurance Code 533 provides that an insurer is not liable for a loss caused by the willful act of the insured. And it has some other language there, but it says this provision is an implied exclusionary clause which by statute is read into all insurance policies under California law. The jury's factual findings establish that Heard's liability is caused by the willful acts of Heard. And what that means is there is something called a collateral estoppel effect. So when you've had a full and fair opportunity to litigate an action and you litigate it through to a jury verdict and the jury returns facts in favor of the other party, you are bound by those facts. You can't come back in a later case and say, hey, forget all that stuff about willful acts. I wasn't really willful. No, the jury has determined that you were willful and you'll be bound by that. So New York Marine really has a pretty decent case here with regard to not having to pay under the insurance policy. So as I mentioned before, Ms. Heard wants to stay this case. She wants to wait until the appeal is finished in order to have this decided by the California trial court, if indeed the trial court makes any determination at all, because as she indicates, she's supposedly not a domiciliary of California. So let's look first at the respective positions of the insurance companies. New York Marine's position is that they've received no evidence that Heard is not a resident of the United States at the time New York Marine filed its complaint, which was July 11th. And Travelers says pretty much the same thing. This issue just arose. Travelers does not have adequate information to take a position. But then it goes on to say this. Travelers understands that New York Marine will argue that it should be able to proceed with part of its case. Travelers strongly opposes a partial stay of insurance litigation, which allows New York Marine to move forward in part as it wishes. This would be prejudicial to Travelers and Ms. Heard, and it would be highly inefficient. Normally, when a lawyer refers to something being highly inefficient, what he really means is this is really going to cause us a lot of trouble, and we're probably going to wind up collaterally estopped later on having to pay a judgment. So I suspect that is what they're worried about. So this is a question of insurance law. Insurance law in most jurisdictions favors the insurance company mostly. Now, it doesn't always favor them, but better than 80% of the time, a case against an insurance company is an uphill battle. So I would suspect that Heard will wind up on the hook for this. Now, why is that important? Here's why that's important. And here's why Travelers agreeing to a stay is a really dumb idea. If New York Marine gets a judgment, a declaratory judgment that says it's not liable, then that leaves only one company available to pay the judgment, and that's going to be Travelers. But it also puts the onus on Amber Heard to take some action to protect herself at that point. And if she follows the advice of counsel, what she'll do is she'll run to the bankruptcy court. Now, when she runs to the bankruptcy court, it's important to remember that at that point, if Travelers has not proceeded forward on its case, it is going to be a judgment. It won't be a judgment creditor. It will be an unsecured creditor. Johnny Depp will be a secured creditor. He'll be the first person in line to get paid by Amber Heard. And everybody else, the electric company, the car company, the notes on her houses, all of these other things, those are going to be unsecured creditors, and they will, if anything, get pennies on the dollar. And so will Travelers. And this is important because in order to file the appeal, Amber Heard had to post a supersedis bond. And that supersedis bond essentially establishes a fund of money to pay the judgment if she loses on appeal. And if she loses on appeal, then whoever put up that bond can go back to Amber Heard and get money from Amber Heard. But if they have not already established a right to do that, for example, if the bond was paid for by Travelers and Travelers hasn't established a right to obtain a judgment against her, then they are going to be an unsecured creditor and it won't work out well for them. Now let's turn to the issue of what happens if the judge says, yeah, you're right, she's stateless, I'm going to dismiss her from this litigation. Well, New York Marine and Travelers will turn around and they will sue her in California State Court, and they will find a way to get her served overseas. Anyway, she is going to be able to run, she's going to be able to stall, she's going to be able to drag this out. But at the end of the day, there will be accountability. And that's what's magical about our court system. We'll see how this shakes out. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. And as always, like, share, subscribe. You know what to do. And again, remember that being kind to people not only is good for them, but it makes you feel good too. Have a great day. We'll catch you on here next time.